information, and this permanency ensures this information in the first place too. Fourthly, then, and lastly, this idea of non-criminal records. This is important because this means that already the criminal records related to sexual harassment cases, or even if you have domestic abuse cases against you as well, they are public as of now in the current status quo as well. We believe that there's important instances or patterns of behavior such as cheating or all other toxic behaviors that should be highlighted, something that this non-criminal records do in the first place too. Moving on then to why do I think that there exists a need for this motion, and why is this motion important in the first place then? On three levels. And firstly, we believe that in toxic relationships, mainly where you have one-sided power dynamics, this means that you need some sort of security within this relationship, or individuals having knowledge about the prior relationships of other individuals too. But on secondary level, we also believe that this is necessary because this means that you know more about what they can't in the status quo as well, right? So, for instance, Googling the person that you're getting a relationship with or hiring private investigators to do so. Individuals are already doing so in the current status quo. We believe that understanding that the need already exists, state then owes the duty and assists us in a better way, in a more regulated way as well then. And thirdly, we also believe that individuals in the current world try to make sure that the ex-romantic partners that they had, even if they had like problematic traits, they try to tell their future partners, the point at which future partners are less likely to trust them or acknowledge this sort of behavior as well. We believe that something that is in state record or in public registry, these people are more likely to trust rather than something coming from an ex-partner itself, right? We believe in that scenario, then the need for this motion exists then. Firstly, then what are we going to talk about? We're going to firstly talk to you about why there's a need for serious commitment and why is there a need of public registry within them. Secondly, why are there more likelihood of toxic relationships within their side? And thirdly, why is there a need of healthy relationships in the first place? Firstly, then, onto this idea of serious commitments, and also understand if op talks to you about how people are like less likely to go into relationships, we believe that that's a perfectly fine trade-off to go with, right? Because even if people have other alternatives to go with, even if they resort to maybe hookup culture or other alternatives, we believe that as long as it makes individuals more protected and not in a situation where they're more vulnerable and they can be taken advantage of, we believe as long as you get some sort of honesty on our side of the house, that is more than perfect, even if you get some marginal decrease in the relationships then. Firstly, then, onto this idea of serious commitment, and this is important because it's obviously going to be when a person is seriously looking for a commitment in future, they are then going to require a public registry to see if they can go into that relationship in the first place too. This means the point at which you need honest relationships in the first place, the point at which you're looking for a future ahead as well. We believe that you need to know what their history has been so as to better be aware of it in the future too. This means that you need to know all sort of information, so whether there's a pattern of cheating that has been going through with that individuals as well, the point at which you can better deal with it as well too. Why so? Because there are two reasons, right? Firstly, because these individuals are vulnerable at that point, the point at which you allow yourself to be like open to that individual, you put in your full commitment from your side, you need to know whether the other person has some sort of like cheating pattern to back that up, or are they even like seriously engaging in the relationship too. But secondly, then onto this idea of future commitments as well, because individuals now have some sort of deterrent as well, where they try to keep themselves accountable to this very registry, the point at which they try to get into relationships with not a problematic mindset, with not a power hierarchy that's only like one-sided, or it's too controlling in the first place. Before I move on to why are there going to be more toxic relationships from their side, let's just have a POI from CO.
Notice that most cases of like cheating or like those bad relationship gets like undercovered. By having this like bureaucracy, you basically like highlights the people who get caught, but and trivializes the people who doesn't get caught. So basically, you create this false sense of security for the people who never get reported, which is extremely harmful for the people who think they're getting a good partner, but they're not.
That's actually not the case, right? So even in cheating cases, people, if they break up, this also obviously means that the public registry is going to have an information of whatever the independent investigators find in the first place. The point at which you're able to think of some sort of able to back your evidence with some sort of cheating cases in the first place, the point at which you're able to prove that, this also means that there are more cases that you can avoid in future. So even if there are like less cases, you still get some sort of a decrease in toxic relationships on our side, even if you get some sort of cases to back that up as well. We believe that even if like there are not all cases that get caught, a minority of the cases, even if they get caught, they still get massive benefits on our side of the house. Secondly, then onto this idea of toxic relationships and how do you get to avoid them. We believe that this also means that now you have enough to know about whenever you're getting in a relationship. This also means the point at which your healthy relationships are not jeopardized in the first place too. So this acts as a deterrent because individuals now know that their record can go within the public registry. The point at which this accountability already exists, individuals are more likely to abide by the sort of rules that does not make the record or public registry bad in the first place too. So on our side, when you have toxic traits within the individuals having a set pattern of, this prevents heartbreaks from people as well. This prevents that sort of problematic experiences or patterns of behavior as well. The point at which they don't have any mechanism from their side to back that up, opposition side today needs to prove to us how do they curb that particular number of set of people that we protect on our side of the house. For all of those reasons, vote for OG.
Thank you very much to Prime Minister for that speech. It's time for Leader of the Opposition to continue.
Am I audible?
Yes, all good.
On side opening opposition, we think that people are capable of growth and change. We don't think that a past event should condemn you to a lifetime of relationships without trust, and that's why we stand proudly on opening opposition. Two things in this speech. First, rebuttal to opening government. Second, three arguments coming from OO. First, people grow from relationships. Second, this destroys trust in relationships. And lastly, a principled argument on privacy. Before that, what is our stance on opposition? We think that on our side, people still know that there is a possibility of their partner cheating on them or lying to them, but they still give them the benefit of the doubt. We think this is much better for any sort of relationship. Moreover, we think that criminal offenses in most cases are known by partners, and we think this is something that's distinct from all these offenses, non-criminal offenses we're talking about. Responses to opening government. First, they talk about a pattern of traits that continue to manifest into future relationships and how the state should protect these people. Several responses. First, we're going to tell you how people can change, and therefore a pattern of past behavior might not explain what they're going to do in the future. Second, we think that the worst excesses are already going to be caught because the worst problems we're talking about are things like abusing their partners are going to be criminal and already going to be condemned on our side. Moreover, we think that even if there might be a pattern, the majority of people make small mistakes. And even in the worst case scenario of constant cheating or constant lying, this is really bad, but it doesn't warrant harming the relationships of the vast majority of people who aren't serial adulterers and who might have just made one mistake in their life. Second, they talk about how an independent panel is going to verify this. This is really sketchy, right? Because these things are really unclear in he says, she says situations. For example, in lying, it's really difficult to ascertain this. So the impact is that there are likely to be cases where people are unfairly charged with certain claims, and we think this is really problematic. Next, they talk about state record and how people are more likely to trust this rather than previous partners. We think, firstly, surely people know this information which has been supplied to the state by the people themselves. And secondly, their points on private investigators is really marginal and extreme. Last, they talk about deterrence as you don't want to end up in this registry. But first, we think this might be true, but the commitment is based on what you are currently doing now rather than what has happened in the past. So we don't think this is likely to happen. But second, this deterrent is weird because no one intends to be toxic, right? No one just starts a relationship thinking I am going to cheat on my partner. So we don't think this is likely to work. First argument, how people grow from relationship and how this motion condemns them. We think what this registry does is it prevents people from turning over a new leaf. 4 reasons why they're likely to do so. First, relationships are oftentimes a process of trial and error, where both parties are experimenting and learning what's right and wrong. So for example, ghosting is obviously quite bad, but not objectively wrong. And also, for traits like controlling behavior, oftentimes what one partner deems controlling might not be what the other partner thinks. So we think oftentimes a lot of these traits are not black and white, they're in the gray area, and we think it takes time for people to realize the mistakes they've done and to change from this. Second, we think that the motion exists after someone has broken up. So we think there is likely to be some new knowledge of how your action has impacted other people. So for example, you might not have expected a white lie to have threatened trust so much, so you're likely to make an extra effort to be really truthful for future relationships. Third, we think people just grow and mature generally. Someone who cheated and was a player in their late teens or 20s might be a completely different person after getting a job and having responsibilities because they're looking for someone to settle down with. they change. Fourth, people also just make mistakes that they regret immensely. So, for example, cheating on someone while drunk at a party and really regretting it the day after. We don't think these are bad people who are unable to change, contrary to what opening government has talked about. What does this motion actually do? We think that this means it's really difficult for you to find new partners once you've done a bad thing, because the registry means that there's a permanent stain on your record. And the mere existence of this record means that people are likely to seek it out just for curiosity's sake. So we think this is going to be really harmful. People are going to make mistakes and they deserve a second chance, especially with the relationship where a lot of actions aren't black and white. So therefore, we think people deserve a second chance. Second argument, how does this destroy trust in relationships? We think what happens with the registry, and if partners have seen it, is that you start off your relationship knowing your partner has cheated in the past, and you're going to be constantly skeptical. And this is grounds for a really toxic relationship. For example, if I know that my partner has cheated before, I would probably be really jealous of other women he's with and check his phone all the time. I'd probably also be like just really paranoid and always be there when he's meeting with his friends, always badgering him about where he's been, maybe even installing a tracking device so I know exactly where he's been. All this means I would be in a really unhappy relationship where I'm always second guessing my partner. And obviously, my partner wouldn't be too overjoyed in this relationship either. He would probably be really frustrated, trying to prove again and again that he won't cheat and always being checked on and questioned all the time. This is likely to be the cause of lots of arguments. And we actually think this can be quite self-fulfilling for lots of the traits that we talked about. So for example, if you have a girlfriend who's constantly badgering you and just really annoying to be with, you're probably going to seek out other people within your relationship to just escape and get away from the toxic relationship you're in. Or if you're just constantly questioned about where you are, you're likely to lie to your partner if you're always being asked and always being second guessed. So we think this registry actually counterproductively creates a lot of the behavior that you want to prevent in the first place. Moreover, as controlling behavior is one of the traits that this motion is talking about, we think this motion actually encourages controlling behavior because you plant the seed of doubt in someone's mind. The comparative on our side is that you would give your partner the benefit of the doubt, and you won't start off the bat by thinking that they're an evil person. Therefore, we think we get much better trust in relationships. Last point, very briefly, on privacy. We think that these traits in a relationship doesn't warrant a permanent stain on one's record, especially when compared to criminal actions such as abuse. We think that people should be in control of this information and also disclose them if they would like to. This is because we think that these are really personal things that people should have access to. It's about your relationship and your love life. We don't think that any other person who might want to be in a relationship with you ought to have access to this information. Because of all these reasons, we're incredibly proud to oppose.
Thank you very much for that speech. It's time for DPM.
Am I audible?
You have some background noise. If you can try to check to mitigate this, that would be great.
Is it better now?
I think you are audible. If there will be any issues, we will text you on the chat. But I think you need to speak quite loud, like on the same volume.
Is this audible?
Yeah. All good now. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm setting my time. Okay. Also, I would prefer POIs in the chat, and when I take a POI, please be a little louder so I can understand it. That would be very helpful. Thank you. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So, what does the current status quo actually look like? So, what people actually do just to stay in these relationships, or just to like check on their partners, is what they do is that either they check on their like social media constantly to see if someone's if they're like actually talking to someone, or constantly check their phones just to have, because they have this insecurity in their minds, because and they don't have any idea what their partner is actually like, because they've just started a relationship and they don't exactly know what this person is like, and they just start getting to know this person. So this is what the shade score looks like, and this is what the kind of insecurity we breed into our into the people who are entering these relationships, and this is the kind of situation we regret, and this is the kind of situation we don't want in our in our model. But also understand how like people the partners can absolutely choose to not look at this registry in the first place if they believe that their partner is perfect, or if they don't want to if they just want to commit to a relationship without without knowing partner's previous relationships, etc. But also on to opposition's case, what they talk about. So they talk about that people are going to like people always have this chance of growing and changing, etc. Understand that your record being open shouldn't even be a problem in that case scenario. If you're so if you're changing, if you're growing into a better person, you should be even more open to discourse, talking about your history or your personal relationships in that case scenario, and to talk about how you feel about them and what happened wrong in those situations, so you can actually discuss with your partner what went wrong and how you can actually prevent those situations in your current relationship, which means that this person's growth isn't hampered in our model. This person can actually grow better in our model when their partner absolutely understands and knows the kind of situation they were in, and knows how to actually talk to their partner, and their partner doesn't need to hide these issues just so that they can show that they're growing as a person or changing in that case. But also when they talk about how worst cases are actually likely to be like out anyway, understand how like emotional manipulation or lying is not something that is very evident, or that is something that people can actually identify very easily. So unless you know that it has already happened to someone else, unless you have that kind of data, you know that this person has a pattern of doing this constantly to their partners, only then you can actually hold this person accountable, or ask them, or tell them, inform them that there is this problematic thing about them, and they need to change this about themselves, which means that they're going to talk it out. Also, this partner is probably going to seek therapy before they actually go into this or or go into a like very serious relationship, even if they were just like casually hanging out or having a casual relationship. But also when they talk about the idea of gray, these being like gray area, and these like not being like actual mistakes, etc. We believe that even if like in our case scenario, people are like charged wrongly in like one case, they have like multiple other cases to back that if they were like innocent or they were not exactly bad people, they can always back them with the other instances that are present in that record as well. Also when they talk about being constantly skeptical, understand that like you are going to be even more paranoid or even more like afraid of your relationship you have when you don't even know your partner's history at all, and you're committing into a like serious relationship with them when they haven't even told you, or you don't even know the details those previous relationships in the first place. Before I move on to my positive cases, there are POI from opening opposition, closing.
Your entire case predicates on the fact that the bureaucracy is absolutely perfect and reports all the cases. I literally proved to you in the last QI, like, notice most cases don't get reported. How could you possibly deal with those cases? Because like right now it's trivialized.
Okay. Okay, so we already told you how there's going to be an independent verification system where these people are not exactly going to start reporting these incidents to the state, or telling them that this is how, what happened to these people, but also understand that the kind of role that state is playing at this point, where the state is actually giving you an infrastructure that instead of going on and stalking your partner, or seeing that your partner is doing so and so activities just to keep in check with them, what state is doing is that state is already making this data readily available to you, so that even if you have any doubts about a relationship, and even if you're going to marry this person and you are in doubts, you can always clear those doubts out when you have this data available to them, whenever you actually request for it. So onto a positive case where we talk like extend on it, where we talk about why like this especially important for people who are going into serious commitments, etc. So understand how like people are always hesitant on going into relationships and don't know what their partner may actually turn out to be. So a lot of time partners hide their past or are actually ashamed of it because they have grown out of it. Even though they have grown out of it, they can still not excuse themselves or can forgive themselves for the things that they have done. What this does is that it actually allows for people to have discussions and can openly like discuss their past with their partners. But also it means that romantic relationships being emotionally draining and demanding, exclusively demanding relationships in particular, which means that the need for informed choice is actually more important in this case, because you're committing to something for a lifetime or at least for a long period of time, and not just for like a casual thing, or it's just like a hookup culture, a hookup where you're just committing for like a few months or something. So the reason why you need an independent third party doing all of this for you is because you are more unlikely to see the red flags in your relationships, because you don't because you're emotionally invested in that relationship. You don't exactly see what this person may be capable of doing, because those small hints that they're actually giving you of lying and manipulation, you don't exactly see them because you're madly in love with this person. You don't exactly see the kind of bad person or the kind of harmful person or exploitative person they can turn out to be, which means that so maybe like in our case, like in a worst case scenario, people might actually start moving towards more towards a hookup culture and may never actually go for like serious romantic relationships. Even then, it's more likely that they're still going to have to be answerable to their future romantic partners when they ask about the kind of gap they have in the registry, where there is absolutely no record of very few instances of records, and they have to explain to their partner why there has been a long gap between why they didn't exactly go into a relationship or something, which means that they're still going to talk about it, at least on our side, which means that at least we have honest relationships. We have people who are willing to commit to each other. We have people who are not going to lie or manipulate each other, or are not going to constantly hack each other's privacy just because they're insecure of what their partner may actually turn out to be. For all those reasons, very proud to propose.
Thank you very much to DPM, and it's time to close the debate on the top house, and we would like to invite the deputy leader of the opposition. Here.
Awesome. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, all good.
Okay. Cool. I prefer POIs in chat, and I'll probably take one from CG at around 5. Okay. Cool. So I'll start then in 3, 2, 1. Okay. I know absolutely nothing about relationships, but even I can tell that the point at which you have this information public and people see it, that's probably likely to cause some suspicion, right? It's a pretty basic mechanism, and it probably leads to a pretty self-fulfilling cycle. None of that material was ever responded to. 3 things in this speech. Firstly, just rebuttal to the opening government case. Secondly, explaining why Sharon's material is super important in actually winning us this round and rebuilding some of the minimal responses that we did hear to it. And finally, talking about privacy if I have time. So firstly, on the stuff they say about, you have a duty to know because you're consenting into a committed relationship, so you ought to have more information. I think the thing that's worth noting here is that no one has perfect information at the point at which they choose to enter into a particularly committed relationship. Indeed, crucially, the thing about a relationship is that it's a leap into the unknown, right? It's a process of experimentation. You go and to do this. And crucially, there's no reason as to why this information is particularly important, or like more important than things about this person's family background or other things that might even be relevant. And actually, I think it probably isn't, because the structural reasons that Sharon gives you as to why even once you've done these things in the past, you're more likely to change. So the information itself is probably likely to be relevant. I think the second thing that's worth noting here is that because opening government, just say, sometimes you won't end up looking at this information, in which case that presumably harms their side of the house the most. Because if it's the case that these are like adulterers or whoever, the most charming people, then they'll convince these people not to look, and so they kind of mitigate their own case. But I think you are probably going to be tempted to have a sense of this, because you probably have a sense of curiosity. You want to find more about your partner before doing the decision. So I think, and also just structurally for opening government's case to land, you probably do have to, in general, check out these people's information on these registers. I also think this information is unlikely to be perfect and contain an accurate record, as opening government assume. Closing opposition flag a weird POI about government bureaucracy making it imperfect. I think there are a lot more simple mechanisms as to why this is unlikely to be the case. Firstly, because the most abusive relationships are the ones that are hardest to escape from, so it's really hard to report these particular things, which is to say that in the instances of like the worst possible groups of people, then these people are still going to be in those toxic and abusive relationships, rather than in the ones that opening government suggests they're going to be. Secondly, though, I think there's kind of some sort of shame associated with reporting this in the first place, right? Because you don't want people to find out about these private issues, and you don't want some unknown person who's your ex's future partner to know. Like, it's something that's deeply private, and you want to have some element of control over these things. And I just don't think that opening government identify this. They assume the information is likely to be complete and perfect. I doubt that's the case. But finally, let's engage in their situation about people who are trapped into these quite bad relationships. I think Sharon gives you 4 structural mechanisms as to why people are likely to adapt after they've been broken up with in these situations and no longer have these particular practices. But aside from all of that, let's engage in the worst case scenario and suppose that these people are still assholes. I have 4 reasons as to why you still are likely to be able to find out about these relationships and escape these toxic dependencies. Firstly, because I think there's an increasing trend of awareness about these issues. People are increasingly knowing about the words like ghosting or like lying or adultery being bad and so on. And there are crucial like support mechanisms that exist through social media where people discuss like how much of an asshole this guy is and all these social media groups that exist. So you probably learn more about these things. Secondly, I think it's pretty obvious that there are certain telltale signs of these things occurring. Like, it's pretty obvious if your partner is like constantly checking their phone and talking to other girls, that this is likely to be something that's, you know, some degree of adultery is going on here. So I think you can probably pretty obviously find out that these people are likely to be quite bad. But thirdly, even if you never find out at this point, I think you have a network of people around you who aren't particularly blinded by these factors, which would enable you to escape. You have your family, you have your friends, who can tell you that this person is being abusive or this person is being a dick, and so you probably need to move away from them. I think that these reasons are why the absolute best case scenario is unlikely to land around. It only does land if people are coerced into these relationships in some sort of arranged marriage or something, but in that case, it's not really mutually exclusive. Yeah, closing.
If I were someone who was in an abusive relationship numerous times and got fucked over by abusive men, I wouldn't give 2 shits about the fact that whether or not you've grown as a person. I'd want to know who I'm getting into a relationship with. Address the real victims and stop portraying cheaters and abusers as victims here. Thank you very much.
Look, the point is they're not victims, but the point is that they've like move past these things, as Sharon explains. But also, even in the absolute worst case scenario, I think you probably do find out that these people are horrific. There are telltale signs that exist, and there's more awareness of these. That's literally the material I just ran. Okay, secondly then on Sharon's material. So I think the first thing that she talks about in terms of growth and like these things not being black and white and people being able to grow and mature. I think the crucial thing that we need to note here is when specifically this round exists. Because opening government are wrong in that this is when you're about to go into a committed, serious relationship. I think you probably check this right at the beginning of any relationship, try and ensure that try and find out more about your partner and so on. So the check probably happens before you actually know a lot about your partner and more than your partner is willing to organically reveal these particular things. I think that this really matters because presumably after a long enough and committed enough relationship, the whole point is that you're willing to share with each other, and this information will come out organically, right? Like your partner will be willing to reveal it themselves. Crucially, I think that this is a lot better as a comparative because it means that it's happening on their own grounds and you're able to gain a sense of common understanding as a relationship rather than the comparative, which is just you unilaterally find out and then your partner ends up feeling really, really horrific. I think that's really important. I think that's the crucial delta that happens on outside the house. But also secondly, I think really importantly, Sharon explains how this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of these relationships. So the thing is then that even if these people have changed, they're continuously associated with their past actions and so are harmed as a result. I think I want to be clear. The extreme cases in this debate are unclear, not in the round. It's very obvious when someone is being clearly abusive. It's very obvious when someone is clearly like doing adultery and ghosting and these sorts of things. What is in the round is the potential multitude of relationships that can occur and cause inherent happiness as a result of this, because people just enjoy the act of being in a relationship and finding someone who they're compatible with. And those things don't occur anymore, point at which you have this degree of suspicion, which creates a poison current throughout the relationship as a whole. Sharon explains that. I think we're pretty clearly winning. So proud to oppose.
Thank you very much for the yellow, and it's time to open the closing half of this debate and invite a member of the government to continue.
Okay, can you see and hear me?
Yes.
All right, let me just get like 10 seconds to organize my notes. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, we're going to be the first team that is going to give you reasons as to why it is justified to register these people. Because these actions have serious real-life harm, and the offenders are aware of it. No one thinks that if I cheat on my partner, she'll be perfectly fine. We know when we cheat that this is going to have devastating psychological impacts on our partner, and they intend to do it. Therefore, there is moral culpability. These harms include bringing back past trauma of these partners who are being cheated on. It can often lead to depression or distrust of future partners, which is a potential long-term harm that happens in the life of people who are cheated on. As an intercourse with women, by promising that you'd marry them later, it is deemed as statutory rape. We already punish lying and manipulation when it comes to sexual encounters, but we don't do it in relationships in general. We just want to expand this conception that already exists. So what is the key framing in this debate? And this is something that opening opposition misses out. The key stakeholder are vulnerable partners who are most often women. Why do we have to care about them? First, they have little to no legal recourse when it comes to such behavior that includes cheating, controlling, and compulsive lying. Often they're subject to victim blaming. Their friends say, I told you so, or you should have taken greater care with your relationship. Third, this can leave them with lasting trauma against relationships, which is one of the greatest sources of satisfaction in life. We help women who currently have these trauma. Why? One, because they now know they can report offenders and they feel much more empowered because they have a legal recourse. Second, they're aware of whether their future partners are problematic or not. Finally, I think that we will be able to change or at least prevent future offenders to a large degree, and this is important. Why? First, because we create awareness against such action. We lead to the unglorification or vilification of such actions through media, because jurors, politicians, etc. will now go on TV and have to justify this law or this stance because this is something new and people need to know why this is happening. Third, this is going to send a message to people that they cannot get off the hook easily and there's legal recourse for the victims. We agree that most offenders won't change, but we create a greater defense for potential victims, and given we frame these victims as vulnerable, we think this is crucial. Opening opposition would like to argue that all of these victims are just victims of all of these like offenders are victims of circumstances, that they've just happened to do it and they will change. But I just want you to observe Did they give you any reason why people are likely to change? There's literally no mech on their side, right? How many people are going to change? What is the percentage here? And what incentive do they have to change, given that they know most people are not going to find out about all of these things anyway? Now, I will give you reasons as to why they're most likely not going to change. 4 reasons, because most of them are repeat offenders who have demonstrated it multiple times. Why? 1, because some of these people are psychotic in nature. They exhibit controlling behavior. They lie and cheat because of impulses and drive they cannot control. 2nd, it is easy to get away with these behaviors because they just have no ramification. You can go on Facebook, you can go on Tinder and create a social justice warrior persona, give a few liberal statuses, and everyone thinks, wow, this dude is great. He can't be an abuser. But of course you are abusing people in the dark of your bedroom. 3rd, pop culture glorifies controlling and cheating. This is due to glorification of cool jocks who get to treat women like shit and feel empowered by doing it. This is due to glorification of things like fuckboys who can get laid with 10 women in a week. These are problematic things, right? And 4th, it is an expression of attitude that has been formed over a prolonged period in life due to influences from society, friends, and toxic masculinity. I think most of these people aren't likely to change. OO gives you no mechanism as to why they would change. The framing here is important. In a world which is increasingly sensitive to mental health needs, we must create deterrence of crimes against mental health. And these, ladies and gentlemen, are crimes against mental health. OO would like you to believe that people will change. But let's just say some of these people want to change. How do we still win on this debate? I think the registry will have specification as to what offense was committed, because if it's a minor offense, this will probably not destroy their life. And growth needs a reference point. We prevent these people from creating false personas, and therefore they now have a reference point from which they can now improve. Yes, trust issues will exist on our side, but it can go away if these people behave well on a consistent manner. Why? Because first, we generally cannot continue to see our loved ones suspiciously. So if we have entered into a relationship with these people, we're more likely to get acclimatized and we're more likely to understand them as the time goes on. Second, we're often sympathetic to our romantic partners as well. And third, finally, people who understand into relationships with such offenders can now take prior mental preparation as to whether they're entering into a problematic relationships. And they say these are mistakes. We say these are not mistakes because mistakes are not done out of malice, right? And these people can still get new partners. Literal prisoners can get married in prison and can find love even from within prison. So I don't think it's that bad. And finally, many people may feel sympathetic to them if they repeat that they are good people now and they're actively trying to change, and they can change perceptions by repeating good behaviors in their workplace, by being a good person in a neighborhood. I think all of these things could possibly happen. I'll take OO.
Yeah, so your mechanism for helping these abused women is forcing them to traumatically relive their past experiences for a registry.
I think that most women who have gone through these traumatic harms would want to seek recourse. They would go through, like, they would repeat these traumatic incidents within their mind in either world, because trauma doesn't just go away if you stop recounting it. But it is much more comforting to know that this person will not create trauma on others. And second, I have a defense mechanism at my hand and people can't just get away. I think it's far better off. Then they say, the worst people will not be reported. First, this is not a reason to not have the law. The marginal impact is still on our side. Second, we can have 911 calls, etc., and hotlines for reporting this. This could make reporting easier for people who are in chronically abusive relationships. And finally, they say there will not be a perfect assessment, so we shouldn't have it. If that was true, literally, it is true for all crimes. No criminal justice system is 100% right. Second, like, government has a fiat on at least a good assessment, if not perfect. And third, most of these assessments are not that hard, right? Professional psychologists know traits that make for controlling behavior and can judge incidents that display such controlling traits. Cheating can literally be proven beyond reasonable doubt. So I don't think it's that big of a gray area. Gray area exists in all crimes. That is not a reason to not have those crimes punished. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And it's time for closing composition to join the debate. Here, member of the audience.
Audio track. Am I audible?
Yes, all good.
Perfect. Give me 1 second, please. Before I start, prefer POI in the chat, obviously. Please do not do oral POI. If you want to give a POI and I'm not taking you after, let's say, the 4th minute, you can turn on your camera, but please do not speak. Okay, starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Panel, I can't believe I'm actually going to say this, but I actually agree with a lot of what closing comment actually brought to you. I think opening half is just a mess because they didn't really identify the people that are most vulnerable in this debate, which is a person who are in very very horrible abusive relationship, right? Today, a couple of things for you. First, characterizing on what conflicts look like and why abusive women are actually being harmed the most. And 2 things, why first, it's very important for people to have personal choice and personal judgment when they form relationship bonds, and 2, why abusive people are actually getting harmed or abusers are actually escaping from those kind of criticized. So first, characterization. What does relationship look like? We tell that most relationships have a lot of conflicts, right? In fact, all relationships have conflicts. So that leads to 2 things. First thing, most things are exaggerated on paper, right? Because when you report a file, when you file things up, you have to correlate it with a certain word, right? You have to say oh, she's ghosting me, she's being harmful for me. Oh, he's a very abusive partner, right? And those words doesn't necessarily give you the context and the contextual things under what scenario it happens, why it happens, what's the consequence of this. It doesn't give you any of that. It just gives you straight plain word, right? But I think a lot of times without the context, the information is very, very mistaken. And 2 things, a lot of things are very trivial, right? With ghosting, really, it's all about personal impression, right? You don't really think okay, maybe she's not responsive, maybe she's too busy. You don't have that context. Again, very, very dangerous. So first point, why is makes it very hard for personal to make personal choices? Notice that people are curious in nature. What does that mean? It means that people would check out those files, right? So it'd be very easy to form a preconceived idea. What does this look like? It's very irrelevant to your future, right? Notice that opening opposition told you that okay, people do change. We agree, but this is not the most important case, right? We on closing opposition told 2 things. First thing, people treat different people differently in different contexts, right? I'll give you an example of me to my ex before, right? My ex probably just stopped responding to me in the later part of our dating career, right? Because she doesn't care about me as much. But the same thing wouldn't happen when she gets into a new relationship, right? Because she actually cares about that person more than she cares about me. Ouch. But still, that's just a fact, right? We shouldn't punish her for treating me because she's not interested in me, because when treating different people, she treats people differently, right? Notice that this important thing here is the personal making personal choices. People should judge their relationship and making that decision to whether engage in a relationship or not by comparing their own experience, right? If I feel happy with this person, if she treats me genuinely, maybe she doesn't treat other people genuinely, which is good for me. I shouldn't have that preconceived concept against her or my partner for that reason, right? So second point, which is more important here, why are abusers actually easier to escape and why we actually harm the victims even more under this motion? Look here is that the most successful abusers are the people who likely hide away all their offenses, right? Opening opposition told you one thing. Is that okay, look, it's incomparative, people change, therefore abusers to get exposed, right? We find this is not the most important thing. First thing, most bad things go undercover, right? I literally repeatedly told you in my POI, a lot of things don't get reported, right? What does this look like? We show that abuse victims actually are more or less likely to actually expose it. Why is that so? Because they, usually first they appear the same on the outside. They always smile in public. They try to hide away their pain, stuff like that. So you can't really tell it directly from their face, right? 2, abuser hides it really well, right? The success of an abuser to have abusive relationship ongoing is literally predicated on the fact that they literally tell the victim to shut the fuck up. You can't report it. I'm going to force you, right? Why is some more harmful on our side of the house? We talk about that first. It's very hard to verify actually everything, right? There's just so many other trivial things in the bureaucracy, which makes it very, very slow to justify, right? Literally, opening government told you that one thing. Okay, we can have pictures and videos. Give you 2 things here. First, it's very, very hard to capture the video and the picture of those kind of things getting reported, right? If you have an abuser who literally is threatening to kill you and beat you down every single fucking night, you can't just hold a camera and be oh, look, I'm having picture and video, I'm having video evidence of this, right? They won't allow you to do that in the first place. And second, even if you allow to do it in the first place, with having that most abusive relationship, victims still try to fight back in some sort, right? I usually end up with physical, fist fighting and stuff like that. And literally, they can just change the narrative by taking equal pictures of you, trying to fight them back and be look, they're just trying to fight back. They're also very, very abusive. They're also very, very aggressive, right? They can literally tone down that. So it makes it very hard to justify, right? And opening government talked about look, oh, okay, we have independent people justifying, verifying this. Notice that unless you actually live with them for long enough time, you actually observe them every single minute of their life. Most abuses happen at night in their home, right? They don't get exposed just being observer, right? Because abusers usually act very nicely in public, right? People literally couldn't tell. That's a very important reason was abusers. So why is it getting worse on their side of the house? Notice that, like I mentioned before in my POI, we trivialize the things that doesn't get reported. Most things get reported. Most things don't get reported in the most dangerous case because like there are successful people who hide away those kind of things, right? So we can report all kind of things. We tell you two things actually happen, right? In your best case, suppose like the bureaucracy is absolutely perfect and reports like all the good things. Like actually everything report is absolutely correct, right? What does that happen here? First, we see a very crammed up bureaucracy, right? Because you have so many trivial things coming. So basically, you decentralize, you defocus, you decrease attention put on the spotlight for abusive cases, right? Because abusers can hide it away. And two, like people just care less, right? In the beginning, maybe they're very curious and very interested. They'd be like, oh, let's check out the bureaucracy. Maybe I can have like good file of like what happened to my partner before, right? But notice that when they actually go to the bureaucracy and check out all the trivial stuff, they get bored, right? Because it's quite useless when someone just telling you that, look, oh, she ghosted me. Oh, look, she's not responsive to me. Oh, I suspect her of cheating. I suspect him of cheating. Like those things are not important and not like that helpful for your relationship, right? So people just get bored. And then essentially, because we are only highlighting like the things that get reported, you actually give a full sense of security to people, right? Because when you check back on file, you can just be like, oh, this person doesn't have a bad record. Maybe he's good. But notice again, good abusers, abusers are bad, but like the successful abusers hide away those kind of things, right? So literally those, like the most successful abusers don't have those kind of things in their record, giving them even more signs of credibility when they clearly do not deserve this. Before we move on, OG, go.
Who try to expose their partners even in status quo. Your world labels them as crazy as there is no factual evidence to back it up. How do you ensure transparency on your side when it's your opinion against your ex's?
Okay, I think it's very dangerous here because like on your side of the house, we still have like sense of sense of control from like media exposure, from like law control and stuff like that. We're like a bad like abuser. The law still like try to track you down, punish you down. But on your side of the house, when you have this motion passed through, what happens is you give like a sense of security to the people who are being abused because like you're very less likely to actually speak up against, right? It's much harder to actually track down and crack down those like individuals who appearingly have like a very good past record, right? Because like literally prove to you, if they're successful abuser, which is usually the worst type of abuser, they have a pretty good record, pretty good damn record because they threaten their people, right? One more thing here. Notice that they can just threaten to the partner, like the victim here, by saying that if you report me, first, I'll report you again, like I was saying, like what I said, they can just twist the narrative. And two, they can just say like, I'm going to file a lot of report against you, basically make you undesirable for that, right? Notice that victims usually get preyed on by like kind of like fear, and they can be like harmed down, pushed down into like giving up, right? Even making the abuser even more successful. Now, most rebuttal are integrated, but let's see what like government side said. The government are extremely like very similar. They talk about like why this turns, right? Which how like bad people won't change. The worst type of abuser won't just like actively change, right? So that's why we have to make sure we actually don't give them the credibility, don't give them the sense of security, and actually push them into the spotlight. And we are the only side of the house who gives you that. Therefore, so proud to oppose.
Thank you very much. And it's time for summary speeches, time for GovWhip.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, all good.
All right. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I would just like to point out in the very beginning that there is literally no engagement to Sajid's entire framing of how these are justified. It's justified to reprimand these individuals for the sort of things that they do, for the intent that they have with regards to how they know that when they're cheating on someone, their partners are likely going to be harmed, or when they're ghosting someone with an already existing trauma of being ghosted, they're likely to be harmed in the long run, or some other real life harms as to how certain women can never enter future relationships because they're so traumatized by these things. Given that that is not been engaged on at all, I think closing government is clearly winning the bottom half on the basis of that in and of itself. But what does closing opposition talk about? And I think this is quite frankly ridiculous coming from them. Like the entire case sounds like some nitpicking of like some feasibility issues. So here's the analogy: just because there can be some fist fighting involved, and you can also manipulate like falsely hurt yourself and claim that you were actually on the receiving end of domestic violence doesn't mean we take away the avenue for domestic violence victims to report instances of domestic violence, right? And the same applies for any other crime. Just because some good criminals can manipulate the authorities into thinking they're not the criminals, doesn't mean we stop punishing those crimes altogether. As long as the intent and as long as it is morally justified to punish these things or hold these people morally culpable, you can. And this is why the engagement to Sadat's moral argument was so very important, because as long as it is morally justified to hold them culpable, we think we should go ahead and hold them culpable. The feasibility issues can be addressed along the way. We can gradually move ahead and do other things. For example, like Sadat said, include psychiatrists who can understand or who can read situations, include real life doctors who can actually predict on how these injuries were incurred, whether or not these were falsely harmed or whether or not these were actual domestic violence injuries. So we think all of those feasibility issues can be done later, but given that it is morally justified on the basis of this contention, I think closing government wins this contention. But now let's move on to the broader issue. So I think it's quite frankly pathetic that the entire op bench today sort of tries to trivialize a lot of these issues. Like says, ghosting is not a major issue because everyone gets ghosted, or people make mistakes, right? Because cheating is not a major issue. People make mistakes all the time. To you, it may be a really small issue. To someone else, it may be a really small issue as well. But for individuals, and this is the major stakeholders that closing government harps about, are individuals who are so traumatized by their past instances of being cheated on or being ghosted by the individuals that they open their hearts out to. I think these are the real victims that we need to protect. So on either side of the house, I think you're not really closing a position on the op bench's impact that, people don't really care much about ghosting, can still exist. Because if you don't care much about ghosting, when you see ghosting as a crime within that registry, you're probably not going to be deterred from entering into the relationship, and thus opening opposition's impact doesn't stand either. These people are going to be permanently scarred from life just because they've ghosted one person. But second, I think if these are not individuals, if these are individuals who are affected by ghosting, or if these are individuals who are affected by cheating, there is a claim that we have of warning them beforehand. And I think from that stakeholder, closing government is the only side who creates some sort of marginal change. Because this debate is not about people who don't care. If this debate is about people who are so traumatized that they fear getting into a relationship. For those individuals, our bench as a whole has zero utility, because those individuals will still fear getting into a relationship because everyone can hide behind their social media personalities. But on our side of the house, even if they treat even if they perform the service and whatnot, you can still check that registry and then enter a relationship. These individuals, I think we are the only side who gives them far more liberty, and for the first time we give them the courage to try and enter new relationships. This is a massive benefit, and this is also something that opening government never really talked about. Why is this a debating argument? Because I think these are the most vulnerable individuals within society, because these are the ones who are affected by these non-criminal illicit behaviors. These are the individuals who are so traumatized that they can't, things that may seem trivial to op bench don't seem trivial to them. For all of these individuals, we think the judgment call is extremely important. But the second layer I'm going to add under this is what op bench as a whole says. It's these things are black and white issues. We don't necessarily think these have to be like that, right? Because I don't think the registry will just have a tick mark this guy's an offender. But this registry can also contain details. Obviously, if you're not someone that's affected by ghosting, but are affected by individuals who are adulterers, you can pick and choose what you're affected by. I think individuals still have the ability to make that judgment call. But secondly, if you are individuals who don't care about these things at all, you also have the privilege of not checking the registry at all. If you want to go ahead Aniket's characterization of relationships being a leap into the unknown, you can still continue to do so. You're not mandated to check this registry in the first place. But in other side of the house, given that these individuals are so threatened by all of these things, we think we are giving them an avenue. But most importantly, obviously, the most trivialist sorts of things are not likely to get reported. Obviously, if it's a breakup and at the end of the day, you're going to grasp the cut off contact, obviously, when you're trying to term that as ghosting, are the people who are the independent verifiers, they're just stupid, right? They're not going to tag these people as offenders on the basis of random ass complaints. These are that just sounds like angsty people who just are going through breakups. Obviously, all of those things can be taken care of. Before we opening opposition if you have anything.
Yeah, so we explain and see a repeat that you might not get reporting in all these instances. Surely that means that these people can't have the sense of security because it won't have all of these harms within it.
Right. So the idea about like how some people will still not be reported and these people will still be able to get away. Firstly, I don't think this false sense of security is a comparative argument in this debate as a whole, because this false sense of security exists in all relationships. Because whenever we enter a relationship, we feel giddy, we feel in love, we are irrational, and that is why you're most likely to ignore the most obvious of red flags in status quo. So this doesn't change under closing opposition or opening opposition's world, but this doesn't mean we take away attention from people who don't get caught. Just because you don't see a registry doesn't mean the status quo reflexes also go away. But for those individuals who do get caught, these individuals are the ones who can hide or who can get away without any sort of repercussions in their side of the house. But in our side of the world, these are individuals we specifically punish. This debate can't be about stakeholders who are unchanged in either side, not people who don't get away, not people who don't care about ghosting or cheating, not people who are unaffected and will enter relationships either ways. This debate is about traumatized victims who fear getting into relationships. This debate is about people who would otherwise have gotten away. These are the people who we bring into limelight and a clear win for closing government. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that speech. And it's time for the last speech of this debate, Upwhip.
Hi. Just a second, please. Jesus. Yeah, I'll just need to set up a timer and I'm good to go. So sorry, just a second. Okay, and I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel. We had a contradictory OG, a needlessly vengeful CG, and an OO that missed links and dropped arguments. That's why we win. Why do we beat OG and CG? Because much of the analysis does carry over. First of all, we clearly stated from like the beginning of the debate through POIs that the worst of the abuse is hidden. And keep in mind that as a strategic point, CG kept slipping into like criminality and like instances of horrible sexual violence and stuff like that. Like they only talked about the worst cases. First of all, those fall out of the debate strategically, and secondly, the ones which do apply, like the worst cases, as we said to you, the most maleficent, the most terrible, the most mentally damaging mental abuse and manipulation will not be detected by the Hild report. Secondly, why do we beat OG and CG? Their case directly incentivizes abusers not to stop abusing as they try to portray through, but rather to become more and more sneaky. A very good example of this would be, for example, to go into like very narrow psychological abuse manipulation. How could this look like? For example, I like pictures of pretty girls on Instagram so that my girlfriend gets insecure. I comment on a movie, like if I like the actress, I'll be like, oh babe, look, this girl's very hot. Thirdly, I complain more about every single wrong thing she does. I like, oh, you cooked this wrong, like you came home late, etc. Fourthly, I befriend like a former ex-lover of mine so that she gets insecure and all of that. Notice that these are undetectable. The only thing that makes them terrible is if they're made with a bad intention in mind. These things could be done by a perfectly good boyfriend unknowingly that they harm. These are by definition undetectable, and this is the sort of behavior that government unfortunately perfectly incentivizes. Third point as to why we beat both government teams is that there is a contradiction at the core of their case. OG tells us on 4 different occasions that the report also can happen in status quo as well. Like it's as easy as literally sending a DM to an ex of the people of the person you want to get with, or like as they said, hire a private investigator, like ask his family, ask his friends. There's a million ways to do it. So then that's the exact problem of their case. Like it is possible right now, and it's done with a better efficiency and none of the harms. 3 reasons for this. First of all, if I ask somebody who was actually there and not a government bureaucrat who had to draw this up in like half an hour, I'll get way more context and I'll be able to ask questions. If you just give me a blank piece of paper, I can manipulate this in any way I want and I can understand anything I want from that piece of paper. Secondly, the state doesn't actively violate privacy on this side of the house. Right now, you put the decision in the hands of somebody who knows the person and who can actually weigh if it is worth breaking the privacy of the person to give this information away. Otherwise, you're making the state actively spy on its citizens and condemn them for things which it does not deem as illegal. And thirdly, you this as an extension with this doesn't empower resentful like status quo mechanisms to get information on future lovers, as opposed to like the report which government is proposing doesn't empower resentful exes to like terrorize people who left them for the entirety of their life with a very valid piece of paper that can be shown to like employers and stuff like that. Most of closing government's arguments are about how people can hide behind social media and like how they can seem saints and stuff like that, but we tell you this is uncomparative precisely because of this. As OG kept telling you, we can expose them on opposition side as well, but with none of the harms. Why do we specifically beat closing government now? So basically, the case on closing government goes like this: abuse is terrible and inexcusable. We should criminalize it. Well, then criminalize it then. Like, don't do this terrible half-assed measure, which basically empowers people to do as much harm as possible, makes the state become a terrible actor and break a million different rights, and like don't actually reach exactly the point which you're trying to get to, right? That's the first big problem with it. Like, this is totally the wrong model if you think this is that bad that it deserves to be criminalized. Secondly, right now you are indiscriminately putting immense power into the hands of people who, like 80% of the time, if you ask for this report for an ex who left you, have an incentive to do harm using this report, because you hate them because they left you and now you resent them. And secondly, you have the ability to spin it and to lie about it however much you want. You can spin this piece of paper in which somebody like shouted for you because you undercooked pasta to look like a national tragedy that should have been pursued in court. A second reason why we beat OG is that the link I'll prove to you now, like the missing link in the OO case and why we take the debate over them, directly interacts with the very, very basic premise of the CG case, that these things are inexcusable and that we should be placing revenge over anything else. Lastly, I would like you to very carefully weigh our extension as to what they bring to you. They're telling you that they do not care about any future abuse, which the report will empower resentful exes to bring upon people who left them completely validly, as long as some people get revenge. They will literally place the petty and minor feeling of revenge over like future indefinite amounts of abuse which they empower people to bring upon. Now, why do we beat OO? Please, again, weigh our extension. Our impact is that the report literally empowers incels and people who have no basic reason to like hate somebody, but they still do, to terrorize that person to terrorize the person to oblivion, right? If the metric of the debate is abuse, we literally blow all the other teams out of the park. Why does it? How exactly does the extension work? Let me just rebuild a bit on my partner's case. Every time, like, again, context will be lacking in this report. No, thank you. I'm not taking POIs. Context can be lacking in this report. How could this look like? I'll tell you in a second. Right? But what's important is that this is a piece of paper that cannot respond to question, that tells you some very objective facts and doesn't make any sort of value judgment on them. And now we will have somebody who hates you because you left them, who has this in their possession because the motion allows this. What will they be doing? Because they hate you and they want to harm you because they're bad people. First of all, every time you get into a new relationship, and it's unlikely that your new partner will ask for the report, they'll simply like DM them on Instagram and seek them out actively and give them messages, fight them at work, and they'll show them the document and then add a million layers of lies on top of it. They will blow things out of proportion. They will add context that was not true, so that it seems that the fact that you got mad at them for literally, like, for instance, the report says he shouted at me one night. The actual context of that is that you came back from like cheating on them because you were at the club. But then the person will only be like, oh, here he shouted at me and I was like very sad and I was depressed, and like they could lie about, for example, like a family member dying, and they abused me at this very weak point in my life, which is completely untrue. But the report gives people who wants to lie the necessary validity to seek out and to destroy people who they have no right to be destroying the lives of. Secondly, every time they apply for a job, every time they like try to move forward with their career, they will seek the employer out, and who employer by law and by the motion, they cannot ask for this. Like employers cannot find this shit out, and they'll do this exact same thing. They'll go there, they'll lie to oblivion, they'll slander you, and the employer will have obvious reason not to do this. Thirdly, if they want to become any sort of public figure, like this, basically that's how it works. Like imagine you're on Dr. Phil and you see a guy you left in 8th grade being there with a 1-page report and telling like an hour of lies against you, and then like your book sales plummet and you're thrown into like and you're throwing into irrelevancy. What's the missing link we bring up to OO? They say that people deserve a second chance. That's the entirety of their case. The missing link is why should we forgive? Why do we apply? Why do they deserve a second chance? When do we forgive people? When agency is small enough to justify the extent of the harm. For example, that's why we don't forgive rapists, because the harm is way too large. As at least give us the 2, please.
Thank you very much for that speech and for the debate as a whole. And now we will be moved, judges, to the breakout room. We will get back